What if I told you the very thing you've been crying about, stressing about, worrying about? The very thing that's been keeping you up at night. It could shift in a moment, not by your power, not by your plan, but by your prayer. Because prayer is not just words thrown into the air. Prayer is the key that unlocks heaven's door. And I don't know who needs this, but God told me to remind you tonight, He still answers prayer. See, some of us treat prayer like a last resort when it was meant to be our first weapon. You don't pray because everything is perfect. You pray because everything is impossible without Him. And here's what's wild. Every time you pray, heaven has to respond. It may not be the answer you want. It may not be the timing you planned, but it will always be the faithfulness of God showing up in the exact way you need it. Think about Daniel. When he prayed, lions' mouths were shut. Think about Hannah. When she prayed, her barrenness was broken. Think about Paul and Silas. When they prayed, prison doors flew open. Prayer doesn't just change things. Prayer changes everything. And here's the part that blesses me. God's faithfulness is not fragile. He doesn't answer because you're flawless. He answers because He's faithful. Even when you doubt, even when you stumble, even when you feel unworthy, His word says, if we are faithless, He remains faithful. That means prayer is never wasted breath. Every tear you cried, every whisper you made, every groan you couldn't even put into words, it all went before the throne of God. So don't you dare give up now. Don't stop praying because you don't see it yet. Just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean it won't happen. God's delays are not God's denials. When you pray, you are planting seeds, and in due season, harvest is coming. Prayer connects your weakness to His strength, your emptiness to His supply, your need to His endless faithfulness. And the enemy is terrified of a believer who refuses to stop praying, because that believer knows that prayer is the place where heaven invades earth. Prayer is not your last resort. It's supposed to be your first response. But too often we treat prayer like the spare tire in the trunk, only pulling it out when life goes flat. No, prayer was never meant to be your emergency tool. It was meant to be your steering wheel. It's how you navigate life. It's how you align with God. It's how you survive the storms that try to take you under. When the diagnosis comes, you don't panic first, you pray first. When the bills pile up, you don't fall apart first, you pray first. When the relationship feels like it's breaking, you don't gossip about it first, you pray first. Because prayer doesn't just put you in touch with God's ear, it puts you in touch with God's heart. And when you start making prayer your first response, you'll see how God starts making miracles your regular reality. Prayer doesn't just change things, it changes everything. The moment you open your mouth and say, Father, I need you, the atmosphere has to shift. Chains start rattling, walls start cracking, the enemy starts trembling. because prayer invites heaven to invade earth. That's why the enemy fights your prayer life so hard, because he knows if you ever really start praying, strongholds will break, doors will open, and miracles will manifest. Look at Paul and Silas locked in that prison. Chains on their hands, guards at the doors, no escape in sight. But at midnight, they didn't complain. They didn't quit. They prayed and they praised. And suddenly, the ground started shaking and the doors swung wide open. That's the power of prayer. It turns midnights into mornings. It turns prisons into platforms. It turns broken situations into breakthrough testimonies. When you pray, you're not just talking into the air. You're shifting the very atmosphere around you. And here's the part that blows my mind. God's faithfulness is greater than our failures. See, some of us think we've messed up so badly that God stopped listening, but the Bible says even when we are faithless, He remains faithful. That means your mistake didn't scare Him. Your doubt didn't shock Him. Your weakness didn't cancel His promise. He's still the same God who heard Peter after he denied Him 3 times. The same God who listened to Jonah even in the belly of a fish. The same God who answered Israel after they turned their backs on Him over and over. If His faithfulness was based on our perfection, He would have left us a long time ago. But His faithfulness flows out of His character, not our performance. That's why prayer works, even when you don't feel worthy. Because it's not about your record, it's about His reputation. And His reputation has never failed. Prayer is the place where your weakness connects to His strength. That's why the enemy wants you to think you've got to have it all together before you pray. Because he knows if you ever bring your brokenness to God, you'll tap into a strength that's not your own. Paul said, "When I am weak, then I am strong," because prayer is the bridge between your inability and God's unlimited ability. You don't have to have the right words. You don't even have to have the energy. Sometimes your prayer is just a tear rolling down your cheek. Sometimes it's just a groan you can't even explain, and the Spirit takes it straight to the throne. And right there in the middle of your weakness, God releases strength you didn't even know you had. That's why you made it through seasons that should have taken you out, because prayer tied your weakness to His power and kept you standing when you should have fallen. And sometimes the reason you don't see the answer right away is because God's faithfulness doesn't always show up the way you pictured it. You prayed for strength, and He gave you a struggle to build it. You prayed for patience, and He gave you a season of waiting. You prayed for deliverance, and He didn't snatch you out. He walked you through, because God doesn't just answer prayers. He answers them in ways that stretch you, grow you, and prepare you. Think about the children of Israel. They prayed for freedom, but instead of skipping straight to the promised land, they went through the wilderness, not because God forgot them, but because he was forming them. Sometimes his answer won't look like your request, but it will always look like his faithfulness. So don't get discouraged when the answer comes in a way you didn't expect. Trust that his way is better, his timing is perfect, and his faithfulness will never fail. Persistent prayer produces powerful results. That's why Jesus told that story about the widow who kept knocking on the judge's door, because he wanted us to see that breakthrough doesn't always come the first time you ask. Sometimes God is testing your consistency. Do you really believe what you're praying for? Will you keep knocking? When the door doesn't open the first time, will you keep asking when heaven seems silent? Elijah prayed for rain, and the first 6 times his servant came back with nothing. But on the 7th time, just a small cloud appeared, and that small cloud carried a mighty downpour. That's what happens when you refuse to give up in prayer. Every knock is building momentum. Every prayer is pushing back darkness. Every petition is shaking something in the unseen realm. Persistence in prayer isn't about convincing God. It's about positioning you to receive what he already prepared. Prayer invites God's presence into every battle. And when God steps in, the fight changes. You can be outnumbered. You can feel unqualified. You can be standing with nothing but a slingshot in front of a giant. But when you've prayed, you're not standing alone. That's why David could look at Goliath and say, "You come at me with sword and spear, but I come at you in the name of the Lord." Prayer brings the name of the Lord into the fight. It's like saying, "God, I can't win this on my own, but if you show up, victory is guaranteed." And haven't you noticed the battles you prayed through turned out differently than the battles you tried to fight in your own strength? That's because prayer doesn't just bring you comfort. It brings you backup. It puts heaven's armies on your side. The enemy might have weapons, but when you pray, you've got the presence of God, and his presence is undefeated. Prayer doesn't just change what's around you. Prayer changes what's inside you. Sometimes the biggest mountain isn't the one in front of you. It's the one inside of you. Fear, doubt, insecurity, anger. But when you pray, God begins to shift your heart. That's why Paul could say, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God." Because prayer doesn't just hand your problems to God. It gives God permission to handle you. It's in prayer that your fear turns into faith. Your worry turns into worship. Your pain turns into purpose. You walked into prayer weighed down, but you walk out lighter, stronger, and more focused. That's the power of prayer. It doesn't just move heaven. It transforms you so you can walk in the strength and peace God already promised. Sometimes we pray and expect God to answer right now. But family, can I tell you, God is never late. He's always on time. You may be in a season where it feels like your prayers are bouncing off the ceiling, like heaven is quiet. But silence is not absence. God's delay is not God's denial. He is working behind the scenes, aligning things, shifting pieces, preparing you for what you prayed for. Because if he gave it to you too soon, it would crush you. If he released it before you were ready, you'd mishandle it. So while you're waiting, he's developing your patience, your faith, your character. And when the answer finally shows up, you'll look back and say, Lord, I see now why you made me wait, because the blessing was worth it, and I was worth preparing. That's the faithfulness of God. He may not come when you want him, but he will always show up right on time. The beauty of prayer is that it doesn't just bring results. It brings relationship. See, too many of us treat prayer like a drive-through. Lord, I need this, I want that, bless me real quick. And then we pull off. But real prayer is a conversation, not a transaction. When you pray, you're not just talking to God, you're listening for his voice, his whispers, his direction. That's why Jesus often withdrew to pray, not just to get strength, but to stay connected. And here's the truth: the more you pray, the more you'll recognize his voice in the noise of life. You won't just hear him in church. You'll hear him in your car, in your kitchen, at your job. Prayer doesn't just change your situation, it keeps you close to the one who holds your future. That closeness, that intimacy, that's where real power lies.